Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and today we're going to have another incredible guest. Super excited for this. We met just briefly at a conference here last week, and just liked his energy, liked his story, wanted to get to know more about him and what makes him tick and why he's made the moves in his life that he has. And I think that it's a valuable story to share. So this is Dan Dukeman, and he has been, in the past, I guess he's retired right now, retired firefighter, EMT, did that for 20 years. And then now he's turned into a real estate agent / investor, PTSD survivor, and now is helping other people find their way out of that darkness so they can thrive and live their best life. He's got a podcast, which I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about. But at the end of the day, just like there's people who need information, we need conversation, we need connection, we need to understand how each other are feeling. And that's one of the things that right now we're focused a lot on this podcast is what are the right questions to ask ourselves? And especially when we're coming from a PTSD situation or a depression, anxiety, those types of situations, what questions can really help us get out of those spirals? Because I shouldn't say everybody, I know I've experienced those spirals at times in my life, and I know many other people do. So what are some good questions to help us pull out of that? So here we're going to talk to Dan about what he's done and how he's done that. So Dan, go ahead and share with us kind of your history and how you got to where you are and why you're so excited about where you're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Sam. So growing up, I had a life like everybody else, pretty good parents, dealt with my share of hardships and difficult times. As human beings, we find as we go through life that there's always people that will treat us really well and treat us really awful, right? And that can be in any aspect of things. So we all learn and adapt and grow, and those things affect us in different ways. For me, service was always a big part of my life growing up. My parents really instilled that in me and encouraged that sort of thing. I never really liked school. So the way that I got into the fire service was I basically had hit a point my senior year where I was either going to go and be a welder, machinist, or fight fire. And one, I knew had a really good paycheck right out of the gate. And I enjoyed it, but it didn't really fuel me. It didn't really give me that passion, right? So I opted my senior year to go right into fire school. And I graduated on like a Thursday, and on a Monday, I started in the fire service. 18 years old, really just dove right in. I've always enjoyed helping people. And one of the things that led me to that around 16, 17 years old, there was a really bad traffic accident in front of my house growing up. And it was a Super Bowl Sunday. Driver was extremely intoxicated. So was the passenger. And my dad and I were talking in the living room in front of the house, and we heard the crash. And I just immediately leapt to action, right? It just was like instincts. Went out, started rendering aid to the driver and the passenger. And that kind of got things started for me, that like, oh, there is something to this. I could do this. And once I started in the fire service, I loved it. It was a great rush of adrenaline. One thing that I'll say is like anybody in the emergency services field is a drug addict. Their drug of choice is adrenaline. And we're just junkies for it. Because with all those things that you do, it's exciting. The dopamine kicks in and you love helping people. And as much as I loved that, over time, those things started to weigh on, which led me to change departments just because I was like, well, maybe like too much medical, too much this, that, I don't know. Just looking for a change, wanted to promote. So went to a different department. I started out with Cal Fire out in California, did 8 years with them, worked on engines, helicopters, did wildland structure, everything. and jumped ship, went to the Forest Service, became a fire investigator and fire prevention officer, captain. Did that for a number of years, and eventually got to a point where it wasn't good for my family. My wife, 2 young kids, and knew it wasn't good for my family. My wife was scared where we were at. We had active death threats. She wouldn't leave the house unless I was with her. So we pulled the pin on the fire career. We had bought a grocery store in central Nebraska just on a whim, right? My wife was a corporate manager for Safeway when she was in high school. Like, she graduated as a corporate manager in high school. And we were like, okay, let's just do this. And the question behind it was, well, what did we want? You asked about those questions. Well, we wanted to build a legacy for our kids. We wanted to give our kids something that we could hand off to them if they wanted, that they could just take and run with it. Unfortunately, us being pretty young, we thought we knew a lot more than we did. We made a lot of mistakes, but we continued to learn from those things. I still, to this day, even last weekend when we met, there was a point in an interaction that I had with somebody, and I had another aha moment about that business, because we continue to learn if we're willing to learn. Left that, we sold it to the competitor in town when we realized that we were in kind of dire straits between declaring bankruptcy or doing something else. Spent some time working odd jobs around Nebraska, eventually went to the oil fields in southeastern Montana. That job kind of fell apart on an election year like it always does, and I found myself looking for a job again. And that's where Utah came into the picture. I found a job that was saying, hey, we need a firefighter EMT, but it was a public works job. So I was kind of curious and intrigued about it, thinking still to this point that I wasn't ever going to get back into fire. Called, asked about it, and they're like, well, we're a really small community, only a couple thousand people, so you are the paid staff on the fire department. You're everything. You take care of water, sewer, roads, you do the burials at the cemetery, everything. So I'm like, okay. So I told them, hey, I was a fire captain and EMT, and the next question out of their mouth was, well, send us a resume. When are you going to do that? I was like, okay, fine. So send them a resume. Flash forward about a month, we're moving to Utah. And in that process, I really did enjoy the work. I enjoyed the fire department aspect and enjoyed that I got to go home at night, even though I still would go on calls in the middle of the night, because that's kind of how those small town volunteer departments work. And I had volunteered for a lot of departments over the years. So about 6 years ago, I found myself after a call just in a really bad space. And it was the first time that I couldn't really ever shake anything from a call. Eventually, it was leading me to drink heavily and to make other bad choices and just not really care about life. I was in a dark space. I was depressed. I didn't really understand what was going on or why. And eventually, I did what I think most people probably do. You turn to the internet and start looking for answers, because it's the world at your fingertips. And so I start kind of looking at things, and I'm like, crap, like I think I have PTSD, which wasn't good for me to hear, because instantly in my mind, I was like, I'm broken. I have a label, and that made it worse. My ex-wife told me, she said, hey, you got to do something about this, because I don't know how to handle you. I don't know how to help you, any of these things. So I made a phone call. It took me about 2 weeks to get up the nerve to make a phone call to a therapist, and started in the treatment process. Now, in that process, I was very resistive because I didn't want to be labeled. It was just a hard thing for me to do. It felt very awkward and out of place, and a lot of stigma around it. In the process of working on healing, I was exposed to multiple more traumatic events, because I was still in the fire department. And I would always get to a place where I'd plateau, and I couldn't ever get to where I was like, okay, I'm great, I'm good, I'm doing awesome. And eventually it was discovered that the treatment that I was doing, which was EMDR treatment, I was resistive to it. So we kind of had this moment of, well, what do we do next? And my therapist said, there's this new treatment available out here, and it's a little different, but if you're into it, like, I can set you up with that person. And that was ketamine. And I didn't really know much about ketamine other than it was used as a form of anesthesia for like surgeries. But I'm like, at this point, I don't want to live. I don't really care. Like, let's just try something. Went to a ketamine treatment facility, talked with the doctor in charge there, and he pretty much said, hey, like you got to quit drinking. Like you're drinking an unhealthy amount, and I can't even treat you until you stop drinking. So I had to stop drinking for 2 weeks, which I was able to do. Went and did the ketamine treatments, and that was when things really started progressing, and I started to be able to ask better questions for what I actually wanted in life, because I had been told that I needed to be done with the fire service. I've seen enough. Like, you've done your time, be done with it. And I didn't really believe that there was anything else that I could do, but I always had an interest in real estate. I had built some houses, I remodeled some houses, had an investment property. So I always kind of had this thing, like maybe it'd be fun to get my real estate license and to do that. And a series of events, life happens, right? I got a divorce. I made the decision when my wife and I divorced that I wasn't going to cope with alcohol. I wasn't going to go meet people in the bars. I wasn't going to associate myself with anything negative or anything that would lower my vibration, right? I wanted to exceed or excel in life. I wanted to do the best that I could and be the best person that I could. So I just kind of did some soul searching and wasn't really sure what that was. I started really honing in my workout routines and eating better and just working on myself. I went all in on myself for the first time in my life. In the process of that, I met some people that led me to some coaching groups. I'd never done any sort of coaching groups before. I always kind of felt turned off by them. But I was all in. So I tried it. I met an even bigger network of people and really was encouraged to share my story. And that was a scary thing for me. I hadn't been on social media for a number of years because I didn't see any value in it. I'd done public speaking in the fire service, but I was scared to record myself and post it on the internet, right? So eventually, late one night, I did it. And it was amazing the response that I got from that, from people saying, we didn't know that this was going on with you. We're glad you're doing better. To people saying, like, hey, I experienced this too, or I had a loved one that committed suicide. And all these events that had just unfolded because of me being willing to share my story. So fast forward, I started a podcast last year called Freeing Your Mind Podcast, and it's all about mental health. I interview first responders, military, and just everyday people, anybody who's willing to share their story of mental health and their journey to overcome those struggles and learn to thrive. And that's been a really big drive in my life because A, it was therapeutic for me, and B, it's therapeutic for other people to share their stories as well as those listening. That's led me to do a little bit of coaching with people and help them find treatment options that work for them, as well as get them started in the treatment process, and then just somebody that's there to mentor and guide them through that process. Got my real estate license, and that was a few months back, and I decided when I did that, I wanted to quit my job. I had a goal at the beginning of last year that I wanted to quit by the end of 2023. And this was rapidly approaching, and I had to have some parameters to do it. I had to have enough money set aside. I had to have everything in place. And, grace of God, whatever it was, everything lined up. And then I had to make that choice to actually jump off the cliff and do it. And we all have a little bit of fear and hesitation with those things. And I sat there and I asked myself, why am I afraid? And obviously it was the security of a paycheck job and knowing that I was going to get a paycheck no matter what. And then the next question I asked myself was, are you happy in that place that you're in? And the answer was no. So the third question was, then what is there that's holding you back from doing exactly what you want? Everything else was lined up the way it needed to be. And the only answer I had was that I was the only one holding myself back. And I made a promise not to do that. So I said, well, that's it. It's time to go. I put in my notice, gave them, actually my boss, less than a week because of the way some holidays fell. And I was out and went all in. And it has truly been the most stress-free experience of my life. especially given that I was so afraid of leaving a secure paycheck. But to be able to do what I love every day, day in and day out, interact with people, look at houses, help people buy and sell homes, work on investment properties. Last week, I picked up my first flip down in Salt Lake City. So we're going through the work right now it was an auction property. So we're going through the work right now to evict the tenant. And then we're going to start working on this property, and we're going to fix it up, make it nice, and put it back on the market. So really, once I think I found my groove and that I knew that I had confidence in myself and I could do whatever I wanted to do if I just really sat down and decided to do it. It's kind of like when you grow up, your parents are like, you can do whatever you want if you set your mind to it. And you're like, yeah, okay. But once you truly believe that, that's when the momentum happens. And I think because of that, it's allowed me to really love life, really get to meet people from all walks of life. I mean, I would have never met you if I wouldn't have started this journey a little over a year and a half ago. And I'm grateful for those things every day, because life is so good when you decide to allow it to be good.
Yeah, I think that's a huge key, right? It's a great when you allow it to be great. And that's not what everybody does. Not everybody chooses to allow themselves for life to be great. And I think that goes back to one of the things you said right in the beginning, is that there's two types of people. Some will treat you well and some will treat you bad. And life, I've found, is a lot about two things. One, identifying who those people are. And then for me, at least, seeking to understand their motivations. But here's the part that I think a lot of people overlook when they hear that statement. And I'm just going to call it out so you don't overlook it this time. Okay. The two types of people who treat you well and treat you bad. Sometimes those are other people. But most of the time, those two people are inside your two ears. They're in between, like they're inside your own head, right? So you are the person who's going to treat yourself bad and treat yourself well, sometimes a little bit of both. And so how do you manage those types of people in your own head? That's a very, very important process to learn to manage, learn to deal with. And it's not easy, and it's not a one and done type thing. It's an everyday. And that's kind of one of the things that we're going to talk about here in a minute is that, like, what is PTSD and how does it happen? Why does it happen? And who may have it that maybe doesn't know they have it? And why is it not necessarily a negative thing, but actually, I wouldn't even say liberating, but at least you can, once you understand it, then you can address it. So let's go back to your high school year. As far as growing up, did you grow up in California? Is that why you were there originally? Okay. So why were like your three? I've never heard anybody have these three options. Like there's tons of options for employment. Why were your three options welder, mechanic, or firefighter, or machinist? Sorry, not mechanic.
So I've always enjoyed doing stuff with my hands, building things. And I had a great shop teacher that taught metal shop and welding. And I just loved the class. I enjoyed it. I didn't really like, the idea of sitting in a trigonometry class. To this day, I couldn't tell you how to do almost any algebra or trigonometry, any of that. But if I'm actually building something, I can do it. But to sit down and do it on paper, it's just never going to happen for me. It's just the way I'm wired. And that teacher really helped me to understand how to do those things and some potential with that. And I enjoyed it. So we had our school district had some occupation placement classes. So one of those was a welding shop that you would actually get certified in all the welding techniques. And I loved doing it, so I just dove in. And it was 2 hours a day worth of classes, junior and senior year. And I just go weld and build stuff for different people, different projects that people would come and need done, stuff that the shop teacher would need. And I was a student teacher for him as well. And he had painstakingly, lined up several careers for me, as well as like some technical schooling to just kind of further that. And so I knew it was an option, and I was excited about it. It would have paid, back in 2000, starting out at like $23 an hour was pretty good. Yeah. So it was like, that was really tempting to just chase that dollar. And I liked the idea of it. I was like, that's good money. I can do all these things. I always wanted to buy a house, And but I had this kind of passion, this fire over here with the fire service. And that was also an option in that occupational placement program that they had was a fire school. And that was after school. So I started doing that. And my teacher started kind of questioning because he knew I was doing it. He's like, well, like, we got this set up. I need you to call this guy. And I was going through the motions with him. And one day about, gosh, I don't know, 2 weeks before the end of my senior year, he pulls me into his office and he's like, close the door. And I'm like, oh crap, this isn't going to be good. And so he's like, what are you doing? What are your plans? I need to know. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And he goes, don't play dumb. Like, in 2 weeks, you're done here. Where are you going? And I said, well, I've been offered several jobs. And he's like, yeah, which one are you going to take? And I said, well, I'm going to take this fire job. And he looked at me and he just started cussing at me. You effing idiot, this and that. You're throwing away so much money. You're a fool. And chewed my butt. And I'm like, and he was really trying to get me to go the other direction. And I just kind of was like, well, I really appreciate the opportunity, but I'm going to try this out. It's a seasonal job. I'm going to go to school in the fall over in, I think it was Orville or Butte College, and continue like some schooling on everything. And he's like, well, you're throwing this 6 months away that you could be working a job and like, gaining traction there. You won't even need the school. And I left his office feeling like really bad. Mm-hmm. But ultimately I knew what I wanted to do. And so I went for it. I took the fire job, started the Monday after I graduated. And so those three options, I just weighed them out. And I think, at the time, maybe I would have been better. I maybe probably would have saved myself the years of trauma I was exposed to. But you never know, like, what would I have dealt with if I had gone the other path? So I think really the decisions we make are all for a reason, and there's no sense in looking back on it. So I very much have always known this was the direction I wanted to go. This is the direction I went, and it happened for a reason.
Yeah. Well, I think that something that's important that you kind of started out with, as well as what do you have a natural inclination or affinity to? Now, that doesn't always mean that that's the direction you should go. I think in a lot of cases, getting these are still all very surface level. When I say surface level, these are the first line defense of okay, welder, machinist, firefighter. What about each of those things do you love doing? Well, I love that I can do it. I love that it comes natural. I love that maybe I'm serving people, I'm helping people, I'm preventing. So there's a lot of other, when you're thinking about what you do versus why do you do what you do, and so many people only look at what they're doing rather than the why behind what they're doing. And when we start to look at the why behind what we're doing, then we actually can see that there's other professions, there's other things in our life that actually either fulfill our desires more and better, or at least equally with less downsides. So it's like there's an element of that where asking yourself, well, why would I be good at this? Why would I enjoy this? Now, here's a question I have. When you went into firefighting, that was seasonal, and it was probably actually more firefighting than EMT work, I would assume, based on where you're saying, or did you know you were getting into EMT? Because most firefighters I talk to, they go into firefighting because they like firefighting. And then, this is no disrespect to EMTs, we need them, but then they get stuck doing their grunt work of EMT work. And it's like, they only get to do a fire 2 or 3 times a year, and they're doing EMT work 2 or 3 times a week or more. And they're like, okay, most firefighters are actually really good EMTs, but they still have to stay physically fit enough to fight a fire. So I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it's just fascinating that people get into it thinking one thing and then find out that really the job of a firefighter is really a job of an EMT.
Yes.
And so how did that square in your mind when you're going through this and you find out, man, this isn't what I really signed up for? I'm not against it. I still enjoy it. I'm still helping people. I'm still all of those things. You had that previous experience as maybe not being an EMT, but being the first responder to a horrific accident. So what were you expecting when you said, yeah, I'm going to go be in the firefighter?
So I knew there was going to be some medical stuff involved. And they don't really talk about the statistic, at least at the time they didn't, that, really 90% plus of your calls are medical in nature. And it's probably even more now because of the updates in fire codes and, all the things that we've done to reduce fires. So I knew it was a part of it, and I was actually okay with it. I was in Boy Scouts growing up, and we were like big scouting family, and my dad played a really active role in that. So, we'd always been CPR certified and like, first aid type stuff. So it didn't really bother me, and I actually enjoyed it and just ran with it. Initially, really, I would say probably a lot of the things that you see and deal with, you don't really know that they're bothering you at the time, or you just kind of like subconsciously know, but you're like, just it's fine, we'll deal with it later. And it isn't until well down the road that you realize you've developed all these habits to deal with those things. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're not positive habits. They're not going out and doing those.
So sometimes, though, like on that vein, sometimes the habits are masks of like actual actions. For instance, drinking or drug abuse or whatever it is. Like sometimes they're actual proactive things you're doing, but some of the habits are not that at all. Some of the habits are identities or ways we view the world. So like what I recognized caring for my little sister before she passed of cancer was it wasn't like a habit that I started doing one certain thing more than before. But what was happening is when I was encountering a health situation with somebody that I loved that I was not able to control, then my solution was dehumanization. And it's like, oh, well, it's this horrific thing. I can mentally deal with this if I just deal with it as like, oh, it's just an arm. It's not a person. It's an arm. The person's inside their head, whatever, right? If you start to separate out what you're doing from reality, then you can deal with it. But when you're sitting there thinking, hey, this person has a family, this person has a mom, a brother, a sister, a child, whatever, and you're going through all of those emotions and the impact of what's happened, I feel like a lot of that, it would be more stressful, the PTSD would be worse if you actually did allow all of that to happen. But also the fact that you're training your mind to view really horrific things as not or inconsequential or just like, I just got to do my job. That also takes a toll on your soul because it's contrary to what your soul wants to do. Your soul wants to care. Your soul wants to love. Your soul wants to identify. And then you're saying, nope, I can't identify because I have a job to do. And I'm like, we need people who can do that and transition into just machine mode and get it done. Like soldiers have to do it. Like there's a lot of people who, I'm grateful that there's people who can do that. And I know that I can if I have to, but I really don't like to. And so, yeah, how did the mental side of it play into the physical side? Because obviously you had some of both, that sounds like.
Yeah. So I think, when you get there, you get on a call and it's your job. It's not your emergency, but it's your job to mitigate it and to take care of the situation. And so obviously we do bottle up that emotion and the things behind it. When you're, for example, if you're doing CPR on somebody and their family members are all in the room, they're just crying hysterically. And, usually somebody on the crew will try to like remove the family members out of that space and talk to them or do something to kind of let us focus, right? Both jobs, it's actually probably a harder job to help the family members than it is the person that's being resuscitated. At least that's my opinion. And as you do that, you immediately you're bottling up those emotions because it is an emotional thing. But at the same time, you need to be able to contain that because you're coming in as the expert. You're the one that needs to take care of it. The problem is that so often when we get back to the station, we don't have time or make time to release that emotion. Sometimes it's a matter of just like, hey, I'm fine, I'm tough, I'm a man, any number of excuses. Or we get back to the station and the alarm goes off again and we're off to the next incident. So sometimes you end up you wait till your shift is over and you have an opportunity to unleash that and just let it go. Or you continue to bottle it up. And so often, because life is life, we want to get home to our friends, to our family. So we just continue to compartmentalize that and keep it packaged up.
Well, and just curious right there, how much of, my the stuff I deal with on a day-to-day basis in my business is not near as graphic or PTSD-ish of what maybe a firefighter would go through. But there's still like that level of like, I can't come home and talk to my wife and my kids about what's going on. Not that I can't, but like there's a noble desire of a man, I feel like. And I feel like this happens on the woman's side as well with her responsibilities, but there's a noble desire to not offload your stresses onto them. Not because I think I'm a man and I should be able to handle it myself. I don't think that at all. It's more just like, man, this is really heavy. I don't want to cause my loved one to also experience heavy things. Like why make two of our lives miserable type of, it's a feeling, at least for me. I'm just being honest. That's a thought process. Like, man,
100% valid and happens a lot.
Yeah. So what is a solution and what's an ideal scenario in that? Because although we're not all firefighters who are listening to this podcast, we all are experiencing things, and PTSD can come from any matter of things. What is a proper, I say proper, but like maybe a healthy outlet and time frame to address those feelings? And how do you structure a relationship to where that's the nature of a relationship, or that's at least a safe conversation inside of that relationship, and understanding that without it making it somebody else's problem. Just like their emergency doesn't need to be your emergency. Well, your mental state of trauma doesn't necessarily need to be somebody else's state of trauma. But how do you share that without it becoming a state of trauma? And
so, there's a lot of things that you can do on a personal level to cope with it. The easiest way, like in the emergency service, and it was still is difficult at times for a lot of people, but they have made opportunities where we do these after action reviews or critical stress debriefings that allow you to really discuss these things. The stress debriefings allow you to really just in open forum, anybody who was on the call is there. It's not anybody who wasn't. So it gives you an opportunity to talk about, hey, this was really hard. Whatever it happened to be. The problem is that there's still a certain level of a lack of vulnerability that we all have. And it's getting better, but usually it takes one person to be willing to do it.
The question about that vulnerability, in certain industries, like if you express too much vulnerability, then maybe not get fired, but like you can't work for a little bit because it's like, well, it really impacted me too much. And so if it impacts you too much, then we're going to have to, whatever they call it when they put you on hold for a little bit to let you recover. And then maybe that decreases pay. Maybe that compounds all of the stress. So it's like, these are scenarios where it's like, how do you provide a safe space for vulnerability and say, hey, it's, as a society, it's okay that they went through this. It's okay that they maybe like are experiencing trauma from this. And that doesn't make them unfit to go help the next person. I'm curious, honestly, what's the...
Yeah. So, and those are all very real concerns. And that's why a lot of people don't speak up. So on a personal level, it's always really important to have your own personal outlet, whether that's a friend or a loved one that you can talk to that will just listen. And a lot of times maybe you just need to preface it with, I just need to unload some stuff. And I don't need you to say anything, because a lot of times if I just started unloading all this trauma on you right now, you'd be like, I'm sorry. Like, what do you say? And so you find things personally that fulfill you, right? And this was a problem that I didn't have. I didn't have these tools established. And this is why it's so important to establish these tools early on. So maybe that's, we all want to be in good shape, but maybe working out is your outlet. That after a bad call, you're going to go for a run, or you're going to go throw some weights around and just blow off some steam and get that out. Maybe it's meditation. Maybe there's something that you like to do that's a craft or a hobby that allows you to just shut down for a minute and just kind of internally process those things in your head and file them properly in your brain. And then you're able to move on. Other times, a lot of people, I was scared of the whole like therapist world, because I was like, that's for crazy people. That was what I thought. And now I know that it's not that, or I just lie to myself and I really am crazy. Who knows? But
maybe you're crazy. Maybe we're all crazy.
Maybe we're all crazy. I I can't recommend therapy enough. And it does take some time to find someone who meshes with you. It may not be your first try with somebody. But what I've found with that is it's a safe space to talk. It's a person who is non-judgmental. They aren't going to pick sides, tell you you're wrong or anything like that. They're just going to ask you a series of questions that allows you to come to the conclusion yourself. And they're trained to do that. And it's such a beautiful process once you're willing to be vulnerable and trust that person enough to do it. And it does take time. Mm-hmm. But for me, that ended up being the first outlet. Once I could trust my therapist enough and actually be willing to say, okay, this is what's going on. Because there was times where I'd be like, I don't really want to talk about this. And she goes, then you probably need to. And she was right. And any of those things, it can be different for anything. There was a guy that I met who works for another department, and his hobby is making soap. And so after a bad call, when he gets off shift, he goes down into his basement and makes soap. It's just therapeutic for him, and he loves it. And I think it's his side hustle, and he sells some bars of soap on the side, but that's his thing. There's other guys that they have their own little wood shop at home or anything else. You just need to do whatever fills your cup.
Right. So what for you, what was the thing when you were looking for a therapist? When I went to therapy, I haven't gone in a while, but when I was going to therapy, it took me probably 4 or 5 therapists to find one that like wasn't necessarily about trust as much as just, did we see the world similarly enough that we could actually communicate? You know, some people, they're coming in from left field and you're like, yeah, I could tell you my whole life story and you're going to see it through your lens. And I don't like, although I want to know what your lens is, if you can't see it from my lens, then it's not going to work, you know? So what was the trust, was trusting your therapist more to do with the chemistry of it? Was it like just it felt right? Were there things inside of yourself that you needed to learn to trust yourself in sharing those things? And so it just took time, that no matter who that other therapist was, if you had met the therapist you finally stuck with, if you had met them first, you probably wouldn't have worked with them because you just didn't trust yourself enough yet. Like, where did that trust come in, and how can, because again, there's lots of people who are listening to this and thinking, well, where's that level of trust? Who do we go talk to? How do we get that? How do we know if we're with the right person? How do we know if we're actually getting the results that we're supposed to? And so how were, at least, I mean, you can't sell it for anybody else, but what was your experience as far as finding the person that you trusted, and how did you know, yeah, I trust this person versus, I don't know.
Yeah. So, the first time that I went to therapy, I went twice, and it was actually before I was in a really bad space. I was just trying to work on some other things, other issues in my life. And I was like, okay, it's all right, but it didn't really feel like that person was relatable to me, which is probably why I stopped. The second time around, I was in such a bad space where I was actively looking for an exit out of this life and had plans. And the only thing that was keeping me from executing those plans was that none of them allowed me to leave this world without affecting the life of somebody else. But I still was like, I'll figure this out because I'm done, you know? And so I was just going through the motions with my therapist. Like I would usually meet anything that she said with, you know, I just meet it with some form of resistance. And then I just kind of go through the motions, and I just wasn't really getting anywhere. And I would say it was probably, you know, I used to tell people that I was helping, like, oh, you need to give it at least 6 tries. And now I don't say that anymore because I don't think there is an answer. It's whatever works for you. And I think you'll just know. For me, at about 6 months, I just kind of finally broke down enough with her that I just started sharing a little bit more than the surface level things. And then I found that, like, hey, this person really does, like, they do this because they care, that they want to help. You're in a situation where, you know, being in the fire service, there was times where we would try to render aid to people and they wouldn't let you because they were scared, or they were just, you know, some trauma that they had. They didn't want you to touch them. And so it really was no different. but I think it's definitely different for everybody. For me, I just kind of got to a point where it was just like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable here, and I'm just going to open up just a little bit, and then I'm going to close right back up. And then I started to see that as I did that, that was helping as I was opening up a little bit. And as time progressed, eventually just the really hard stuff was still hard to open up to, because I would say, like, I don't even want to talk about this. And she would say, well, then you probably need to. And so then we'd kind of start to delve into it. And eventually I just got to a point where I had built that relationship with her and that trust and that rapport, that now I can walk into her office and say anything. Mm-hmm. And I think some of that came from because I would lash out at her. Like, there would be things that, like, hey, you should, like, not really her telling me what to do, but asking the questions, and then I'm coming up with the solutions of what to do. But then me not liking that solution and lashing out at her for it. So sometimes I'd walk into her office and be like, hey, I'm really sorry about, like, what I said last week. And usually she would, I mean, every time she'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. What'd you say?
Yeah. And I'm like, well, are you even listening? And then something I'd say, and she goes, no, I just didn't take offense to that. Like my job isn't to get upset at what you say to me, even though I was saying some pretty freaking horrible things to her. But she's like, my job is to just be here and just open and be a space for you to talk and help you. And so once those things started happening, then I was like, this is a pretty special kind of person who can sit there and let somebody verbally abuse them. And then the next week be like, hey, how's it going? Like nothing ever happened. And so all those things kind of stacked up.
That's not encouraging verbal abuse of your therapist.
No,
just
not
so being clear here.
Just so we're clear, be nice. They're wonderful people.
We're not condoning this behavior. We're just recognizing that some people really care, and they're doing what they're doing because they care, not because you're paying them. Yes, you're paying them, but like they're doing it because they care and they want to help you.
Yes.
That's funny. So question about this, because the other thing is you went from fires and things over to Nebraska. So California, Nebraska, that's like an awkward move unless, like, why would you choose Nebraska? Number one. And then number two, how did you feel like making that type of a move would like you mentioned, leave a legacy, build something and leave something to your children. Like, why other than your wife had experience in stores, why a store? Like, what was the drive there?
So Nebraska just kind of happened. We wanted out of California, and that was what we thought the best opportunity of all these grocery stores that we were looking at. The reason that we had chose a grocery store was not just because of her experience, but in our minds at the time, from an economic standpoint, and you know, if everything gets bad, what business will always exist was, well, everybody's got to eat. So why not a grocery store? Not knowing that it's literally a nickel and dime business. You have to move big volume to make big money. You know, pretty much your 5-10 cents that you make on every item that you sell. So, but not knowing
that. It's fine if you're Walmart, but
yeah, or Costco, or, you know,
if you're in a quote unquote town where there's 5,000 people, it's you're not moving much.
Yep, not moving much. So the idea behind the legacy was just that we both really wanted to do more and do better than our parents did. Not that we ever felt like our parents didn't do good enough. We just always had this thought process of, you know, your parents raise you to the best of their ability. And so as a parent, we both decided that we want to raise our kids the best we can. But the way that we would see that our kids are thriving in their life is to see them raise their children better than we raised them. Mm-hmm. So generationally, there's just this thought process of like generationally, each generation rises incrementally because of the lessons learned from the previous generation. So we really felt like us being willing to just dip out on the 9-to-5 paycheck, work your life until you're like 70 and then retire for a few years, we really felt like we were going to build the life that was going to allow us to be present with our kids all the time, and to just teach them that they could do whatever they wanted to do. And in the end, those were all really great ideas. We didn't mentally prepare ourselves. We didn't do the homework ahead of time to actually be in that mindset of what actually needed to occur for that to be a success for us. Our kids were young, so they remember it. The biggest takeaway that I think my oldest daughter remembers about it was that there was a time period where we chose which bills we were paying and that we weren't. So she has this profound sense of money management and saving because she saw us just like, okay, we've got this much money and we've got to make it last the month. So like when we'd go to the grocery store, it was like, hey, if it's not on the list, we're not getting. And sometimes if it's on the list and we're walking through the store with a calculator, making sure that we don't go over the amount that we can spend, looking at the cart and going, okay, this item, we can probably make it a month without.
Right.
And so my oldest daughter, she very much like worries about money. And I've worked with her a lot on not worrying about it, but being responsible with it. So when she does spend money, she's like, oh, like I only have like $500 left. And you're like, you spent $12. And it was the first time you spent $12 in like a year, you know? So I think we don't always know what we're going to pass on, but that was one of the things that she gained from it. She's very responsible with money, and I'm thankful for it.
That's awesome.
My youngest daughter, or my middle daughter, she, I think her gain from it was just that she remembered that she was always in the grocery store with us. There was, she wasn't in daycare for maybe just but a couple hours throughout the week, but the rest of the time she was with us. And she very much remembers like getting to just walk through the grocery store with her sister, and like they just pull stuff off the shelf and be like, can I have this? You know? And so she remembers the mom and dad being with her throughout the entire day. And since I've transitioned into real estate, that's been awesome because they're seeing that, you know, hey, if there's a doctor's appointment, I'm taking you. If there is, you know, you're off of school for the week because of whatever school vacation we're having now, I might still be in my office working, but when I take a break, I get to spend that time with them. Or I get to very much dictate my schedule and say, yeah, like I probably should be working right now, but I'm going to take half the day and go do something with my kids because they're not at school. Mm-hmm. And so that time freedom really resonates with them. My youngest daughter wasn't even born when we had the grocery store. She came into the world right before we moved to Utah. So she has very little recollection of any of it other than just kind of the life that we had when I was the only one working and when my wife and I were both working, my ex-wife and I, and then the transition to now.
Yeah, that's so fascinating just to think about like what I think about it. My kids are 6, 4, almost 5, and 20 months or so. And I think about like, what are the lessons that they're going to remember? And it's interesting. We've been trying to teach our children money management, to be wise with it, responsible. And they have the habit of just like, whenever we go to a store, I want that, you know, just like any kid does. It's not like our kids are unique in that way, but it's like, well, did you save up for it? Did you bring your money, or is it at home? Like, did you prepare to get something when you came to the store? No, you didn't. Okay, well, then you don't get anything at the store. And so then they've been saying, you know, when I'm a dad, I'm going to let my kids buy whatever they want, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, I think that maybe you will think that until you have your own kids. And then you're like, hey, wait a second. That's like what I think I want. But then maybe we think that we should raise our kids better than our parents did. And what I've found more often than not is that I'm returning back to how my parents raised me and say, you know, this actually produced a good value that I like. I don't have a better, I don't have a better way of passing on this lesson than what my parents did. Some things I do, but like there's a lot that like, they did a good job. They created us to be where we are. They created a lot of happiness. They created a lot of joy, a lot of hard work, a lot of work ethic, a lot of great things. And so rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every generation, like have some respect for the previous generation. That's something that I've been learning, probably too slow, honestly, because my son is 6 years old at this point, but I'm definitely thinking it more often than not. Like, how can I then pass what was good? What was the good things? And when I went to therapy, it was actually right before I got married. That was one of the original reasons I went to therapy, was to help pick through my childhood, prepare for marriage, and say, look, what was good about my life and what was something I do not want to repeat, so that I could have a clearer idea of what would it look like going into a marriage. So that's a huge thing. I want to highlight before we go here, the 3 questions that you kind of mentioned. Why are you afraid to change your life? These are questions I think if somebody actually sits down and journals about and allows themselves the time to answer these, why are you afraid? Like, what are you afraid of? Really understanding, what are you afraid of? And then when you identify what you're afraid of, that's great. Are you even happy with what you have now? So many people, like you mentioned, are scared of losing the happiness that they have. And it's like, you were never happy doing that. The reason you've been wanting to change, the reason that you've felt like, hey, something needs to die here. It's kind of funny. Suicide is generally a more negative connotation to it. And I'm not making light of anybody's suicide, but I'm curious from your perspective, because I've experienced it, or the desire to, and had friends who actually completed it. But I really believe that when I've had those urges or wanted it, it wasn't that I actually was done with this life. It was that I was done with aspects of this life, and I didn't know any other way to remove myself from the situation than to remove myself from the situation, right? But as soon as there was a more way of like removing the situation from myself rather than removing myself from the situation, I was really thrilled to be alive. Like I love being alive, but there's definitely times where it's like, it would be easier not to be alive. Like the easier solution would be gone, So I think that suicide is a good indicator that something in your life needs to die. Something needs to be moved, whether that's addiction, whether that's the employment, whether that's the relationship, whatever it is, something needs to die. You don't need to end your life, but some aspect of your life needs to end and you need to move on. So speak to that just a little bit. Like, how do you differentiate those 2 things that could be confusing, but could change somebody's life literally if they can understand the difference?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as like, why aren't you happy? That's, if you just ask yourself questions and be willing to give yourself honest answers, because it's important too to note that, if you're not happy right now, a change isn't necessarily going to make you happy. So you have to at least be grateful and acknowledge the things that do bring you joy in life. And yes, when you're in a very dark place, it's hard to find anything that brings you joy. I mean, for me, the one thing I always would say, when I was asked, like, well, what's good? I said, I got out of bed. I'm here. Because that was all I could do. Like, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything. Like, there was a lot of times that I hoped that I'd just die in my sleep and that'd be it. At least then I wouldn't have to, it wouldn't be me hurting somebody else. Be like, God did it, But in the end, it's what do you have joy for right now? And identifying that. And then whatever it is that doesn't bring you joy, why doesn't it bring you joy? And what's the next logical step to take to remove that from your life and replace it with something that does bring us joy? Especially when in regards to, your mental health and places that you may or may not be, like with PTSD, decision-making becomes very hard, or at least it did for me. And so what I tended to do, and I still do it sometimes, but I've gotten much better at it because of the way I've programmed myself to think, I would overthink everything. So I would identify the problem and then the solution, but then I'd be like, well, I can't ever get to this solution because there's these 10,000 steps in between and I just can't. And then I'd sit there and just spin my wheels and never do anything. So once I finally decided, and it just came to me, and I don't know if I heard somebody say it or how it finally clicked, but for me, it was, what was the next logical step to get from where I'm at now to where I want to be? And it's not the big leap to get there. It's just the next tiny step. And then once I'm standing in that space, what's the next step? And not worry about the 5 steps, 20 steps, 100 steps in front of you, but the next logical one. And take that step. Take action on the littlest of things. And then it's not overwhelming.
Right.
And you just continue to progress. Did I answer that? Was there another part to that?
No, that's awesome. Because then the next question that you asked was, what's holding you back? And oftentimes the thing that's holding you back is the overwhelm of, man, I have to go all that way. It's like, wait, just take one step. I think that's kind of the best advice with anything in life is, look, do you know how to be the best real estate agent? Do you know how to fix and flip a house? Do you know how to do it? No, there's like multiple steps here. And if you think of having to do all of it on day one, it's overwhelming. But if you think, hey, I just got to do this next step, and then the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step, you do one step at a time, you can get really far. It's funny that it's Christmas time. There's a old claymation movie, and I don't actually know what the name of the movie is, but it's about Santa Claus and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And there's this song in it that's just like, you just take one step in front of the other. And that's the whole song, as they say it like 1,000 times. Take one step, put it in front of the other. And that's so true about life and about preparing for your future. And rather than trying to decide, hey, this is exactly where I want to go. I think that our dreams and things, they need clarity. We need focus. We need all that direction, but it's okay to have adjustments along the way. If there's a traffic, or if there's whatever, you don't get onto the freeway and say, I'm staying in this lane the whole way, baby. No matter what gets in my way, I'm staying. No, you're like moving, you're adjusting so you can get to where you need to get to on and off the freeway and to the final destination. But you have these major thoroughways where it's really inconsequential which lane you're in. Just get in a lane and move in the right direction. Don't try and go the wrong direction. Just go in the right direction. And there's a lot of people joining you on this journey. And then as you get into where more specifics, there's going to be less people joining you, and that's okay too. And so anyways, I really appreciate this conversation a lot. I hope it helps people. I know it's definitely helped me have some new ideas about ways that I can process through my own life, and also how to help my own kids, think about their life and think about what comes next for them. If somebody wanted to, well, first you kind of mentioned your podcast, but where is your podcast hosted, and how often are you posting episodes there?
So typically it's a weekly podcast. We've been off for about the last month, just retooling it and getting some more episodes banked up before we relaunch. So probably I'm thinking beginning of the year we'll relaunch that. There is a pretty good bank of episodes. They were weekly episodes. So I am on YouTube and all the podcasting platforms, and it's Freeing Your Mind Podcast.
Okay. And you co-host that with another guy, or?
Nope, just myself, and then whoever I have on as a guest. Are some solo episodes, but mostly try to do guests just because I feel like it allows another point of view and another story to be shared. Mm-hmm. And it really encourages the flow of conversation.
Sure. No, I love that. So another great podcast, if you want to go listen to that, Freeing Your Mind Podcast. And then if you just want to learn more about what Daniel's doing as far as his real estate, he's up in Utah primarily, but I'm sure if you got a good deal or you got something going on, reach out to him. He's excited to learn and definitely a go-getter. So if you need somebody like that on your team, or when I say team, to do a deal with you, then it's worth reaching out and at least connecting. With that being said, hey, thanks a bunch, Daniel. Any last words?
Yeah. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn a little bit, but the best way is probably Instagram, Daniel Dukeman or Dan R. Dukeman in the search will get you to me. And I'd love to connect. I'm pretty active on there, so I usually respond pretty quick.
Awesome.
And happy to help.
Cool. Well, with that being said, we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show.
Thanks for having me on, Sam.
Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.